Have you ever wanted combat to be more fast-paced and cinematic? Or have you ever wanted to add a combat into a one-shot or your current campaign and you just didn't really want to stake an hour just to commit to this little thing? It was a more story beat thing and you want to just keep the game moving? I'm the Dungeon Coach, creator of DC 20, and I have a solution for you called Combat Skill Challenges. I've done multiple videos on skill challenges. I created a new system called one-round skill challenges, and this is just an extension of that called Combat Skill Challenges. These are weaved entirely into the framework of DC 20, but you can easily use them in Dungeons and Dragons as well and other tabletop roleplay games as just a high combat, high cinematic scene to run with some sort of challenge in place. I have systems for exploration skill challenges, social skill challenges, combat skill challenges, and more, but we're talking about combat skill challenges. So we're going to talk about what the problem is that this is solving, how these actually work, and different ways you can implement them into your games. Along with a bunch of examples of me actually doing this so you can really open up your minds to see how you could be using this yourself from playtests I did at Gen Con. Okay, so the problem is we've all been there whenever we're running our games and you know there's just like a bar fight that you want to run. Something super simple that you just want to let the player scratch that itch of combat. Maybe it's been a session or so and your group loves combat. They want to get their hands dirty, or the certain story beat really has some sort of conflict where there would be a fight, but you really don't want to throw down a battle map and have it be too tactical. Or maybe this is something entirely unplanned and your players went off the rails and they find some monster and you're describing some monster that you're making up out of nowhere that you don't have a mini for, you don't have a battle map for, you don't have any mechanics for laid out in your head. This what's going on? And it would feel super weird and lame to like run that off and be like, oh, you could do theater of the mind, sure, but then you're coming up with stuff and then now they roll for initiative and you have to get the orders and then they have to do turns, and I admit that maybe that's just not it. What if you could describe cool cinematic stuff that happens, team-based things, combo moves, awesome cool stuff that you're throwing at your players? And a lot of times we want to have these little combats leading up to a bigger combat to whittle them down, wear down the resources. The adventuring day is going on and you know there's some big fight here and you don't want them to come in with every single resource at full health, full mana, full everything, ready to go. So as a dungeon master, we whittle them down, we wear down the resources, you throw traps at them, you throw different stuff at them. And in general, a lot of times that's combats. You'll have one or two little combats leading up to it. They've used some of the resources, they're not 100%, and now they got to think on their feet for that final boss. Well, this is a solution for that too, because this also whittles down resources. So now, how does it work? For every combat skill challenge, there is a DC that is set for how difficult this combat skill challenge is. Now, this number in general is a mystery number. As a dungeon master, you could totally tell the players this number if you wanted them to know. And how I run it is I let them try and figure it out, kind of like how they would an armor class. And as soon as they hit it exactly, I say you exactly hit or just failed, just succeed, whatever. But now we have this overall DC that is set, and now you go around the table and every player at that table, every character gets one roll to describe what they do towards this challenge. You as a dungeon master set the stage for what that challenge is that they're trying to overcome. Throw different things at them, give them lots of stuff that they can engage with and interact with. Maybe something's about to fall down, there's a creature that's running at them, has a huge boulder in one hand and a huge mace in the other hand, and he's starting to throw something. Describe different stuff, and this is not a 1 second, it's a round by round. What's happening? No. This is a big dynamic story that could take place over the course of multiple minutes even. I've ran this as a fortress defense thing where they are trying to defend an entire city and they're going to have to see who's going to do what, where am I going to go, and they have to make their checks because again, they only get one check. And there's not a structured initiative for this whole thing. Players can just say and engage with this combat and in this challenge in whatever way and order that they want. They can interact with each other, and maybe one player doesn't really know what they want to do for their one check, but then as soon as one player says, I'm going to climb the walls and jump over ooh, I could help you and do. So every player is interacting and sparking little bits of creativity in the others, and then each person, however interconnected it is, goes around and makes their one single check. They might describe things like attacking stuff, and they could make attack checks and attack rolls, and that would be their skill check to try and beat the DC. It doesn't have to only be a list of skills in the skill check. You can have them say that there's casting a spell in a certain way and they're using a spell. In DC 20, that's called a spell check, and just like there's attack checks and spell checks, a spell check in D&D, if you're trying to convert this thing over, would be your spellcasting modifier, whatever that is, plus your proficiency bonus. So players could describe themselves athletically climbing a wall, sneaking around to be able to get a surprise attack on something, attacking, spellcasting, whatever you're doing. So now everyone's described what they're doing in the scene, and you haven't told any stories yet. You're not trying to, don't go to the big description overview thing. You don't know how things went. Yeah, they describe that what they're trying to do, but as we know in TTRPGs, you don't know until the dice tell the story and help the whole thing along. So everyone goes around and makes their check. They are trying to hit that DC. If you succeed that DC, you get one success point. Awesome, cool. There's a certain amount of success points you need in order to complete and succeed at this combat skill challenge. And just side note for Dungeon Masters, that number for me is usually equal to the number of players at the table plus 1. And you can control the difficulty of how hard this is by the number of success points needed and really by the DC that you set. So you could set a high DC and lower the success points, vice versa, or have a high DC and a lot of success points needed. But I'll give some tips and tricks on how I set all that stuff at the end. So again, if you succeed, that is 1 success point. But if you succeed by 5, which is an entire system of embedded into the core foundation of DC 20, but you could easily apply this to other things as well. Every 5 points you succeed by gives you another success point. So if you normally with the DC is 15 and you get a 15, 16, 17, sure, that's a success, awesome. But if you get a 20, oh, that's 2 success points. If you get a 25 or higher, oh my God, that's 3 success points. And on a natural 20, you add 1 success point on top of everything else. So as you can see, you can possibly get more and more success points, which is why in general I have it equal to the number of players plus 1 or 2 or 3. But now comes the fun part, because what happens if you fail that DC? The DC is 15, you get a 14, 10, something, I don't know, you fail the DC, you take damage. In DC 20, you take 1 damage. Now, this number can scale up, and in general, you take an amount of damage equal to half your level. It's a number called your combat masteries, just so that the threat scales with you over time. But you can also take that number. Let's say they're level 10 players and you want to throw a combat skill challenge at them. That means when they fail, they take 5 damage, which in DC 20, that's a decent chunk of damage there. Numbers in DC 20 compared to D&D are about 1/4 smaller. I think it's just a better health pool to have a little more compact. But anyway, that level 10 group that takes 5 damage, if you wanted to be a little bit lighter or easier, it's just a little tavern brawl, who cares? Oh, you could go down to 3 damage, 2 damage, you want to lighten it up. Or you could increase it and be like, you take 8 damage for every failure. And to make things worse, every 5 that you fail by, you increase the amount of damage that you take. And on a natural 1, you add another damage as well on top of that, and you could really get pretty hurt. So now we've worn down some resources. We're whittling down that health pool. They're gonna have to spend some resources, healing potions, spells, magic, cure, rest. Who knows what they're gonna have to do to be able to kind of repair themselves, spend some hit dice, or in DC 20 it's called rest points. Either way, we've accomplished our goal of whittling down those resources, and we've also accomplished the goal of quick. The speed of this thing is so fast. It's 1 round around the table, maybe some strategizing beforehand, some teamwork, some collaborative storytelling of like, oh, I'll do this, I'll hoist you up so you can jump onto the creature's head. Yeah, and they tell this story of what might happen. And then my favorite part is when they roll the dice and we see who succeeded and failed. And now we get to collectively tell a story with both sides of the table. So in this really interesting spot here, whenever we run a combat skill challenge like this, and then as soon as it's over, we see the results. We know how many failures there are. We know how many successes there are. And I can tell them, y'all succeeded. And then we can all collectively tell that story of what that looks like. So a player could have described, I'm gonna hoist you up and throw you up there. They made an athletics check. And the player's in the air jumping and they're gonna stab the creature. They make an attack roll. While another caster is casting a spell and they make a spell check. Another character sneaking around the back, just stab it in the back. They make a stealth check. Those are the 4 checks for these 4 hypothetical players that I just made up. But now they roll their dice, and let's say they all succeeded except the stealth guy. Well, now that story, that stealth person that failed their stealth check, they took damage. They took some amount of damage, right? So now we have to tell a story and describe that situation. Yes, they succeeded. The overall group succeeded, but we have to tell a story now of how they took damage. I would describe a story here where the stealth person sneaks in, the creature sniffs them out, sees them, turns around, slashes them once across the chest, and then whoosh, their allies jump in and save the day. Or what about a scenario where 2 of them failed and 2 of them succeeded? Overall, the group failed, but for the story purposes, the end result is still you kill the monster. That's not the whole point of the story, is seeing if you can kill the monster or not. If that was the case, you probably should use an actual combat for that. You could use this combat skill challenge for this as well, but for this hypothetical story, if you wanted to kill this monster, at the end of this combat skill challenge, the monster dies. You're just trying to succeed, as in not take damage, possibly get some extra loot or do some other things. You can have extra rewards for the successes of how many success points they gain, or failure conditions on bad things that happens if you have an overall failure versus an overall success. So let's say that 2 of those players failed and 2 succeeded, and the 2 that failed were the ones that did the hoist them, throw at the creature, and the jump attack, right? If both of those failed, that story looks like a spellcaster casting spells, a sneaky person sneaking from behind, and then the person throws their ally into the mouth of this creature, and then he makes the attack, gets off, but he's inside the creature, takes some damage, they take some damage, the creature falls on the friend, hits both of them. That's the reason why they took damage. So it's a really cool collaborative storytelling of trying to figure out and explain how these people took damage as a result of this combat skill challenge. That's the big picture of how combat skill challenges work, but there's more subtleties and some little extra side rules that I want to throw in there as well, along with some examples. Time out, just how combat skill challenges are making combat shorter and take less time and making more efficient for your games. Today's sponsor of this video is doing the same thing, but for your world. World Anvil can streamline and present you with plenty of different options and tools that they keep adding more and more to be able to streamline your world in a way that you can organize it, wrap your head around it, present it to your players, and make you really think about your world. True story, before I started using World Anvil, I had all my notes just in pieces of paper and stuff. And then when I had to think about something of the world, I'm just having to look through and try and find the right page and then the right spot with that certain bit of lore in there. And even if you use a text-based thing, you can kind of search for it. But in World Anvil, they do so much of that work for you. Everything is cleanly organized in different little categories along with icons to make it very intuitive for you not only to think of what to put there, but for you to find it afterwards. World Anvil just makes world builders' lives so much easier, and you can jump on links down in the description so you can check out and poke around on there, see what you like for free, and they also have some subscription models as well to unlock even more stuff. So a big thank you to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. Back to it. So another important thing here that I alluded to earlier is overall success and failure conditions of the group. So if you're fighting a monster per se and you want to have an overall success, maybe you needed to kill a monster and get a certain part of the monster, but a success means you found that part and you got the horn or whatever and you can return it back undamaged. But on a failure, you killed the monster, but the horn's cracked in half as part of the damage when it fell, or however you want to describe it, and then now, a little bit of a setback and it's still failing forward, whatever you want it to be. Or you could have the failure condition be the monster runs away. Maybe they're fighting a creature that has wings of some kind and they all try and do their things and they're doing and they overall fail and the creature flies away. Or maybe your combat skill challenge fails into combat, and then after taking all that damage from the entry trying to get into it, you could have a combat happen afterwards. Then you throw down the battle mat. There's so many options and possibilities on successes and failures. But if the overall group fails, something also that I do is anyone who failed, if the overall group fails, anyone who had a failure on their check takes an additional 1 damage. Yes, that's right. If you have a group of 4 people and one of them fails their check, they take 1 damage for failing the check plus another 1 damage for every 5 that they fail the check by. Yes, but if the overall group fails, let's say that the 2 people failed, 2 people succeeded, they didn't get enough success points, because they could. 2 people could succeed. If one gets a natural 20, that could be enough to have, carry the whole thing. I've seen one where 3 people failed and this person got a natural 20 and it was a lower amount of success points needed, etc. And they actually won it solo by themselves. Another cool moment. But anyway, let's say it's a 2 and 2. So 2 players failed. They each individually take 1 point of damage for each, 5 that they failed by and all that kind of stuff. So let's say they took 1 damage and they took 2 damage because they failed by 5, okay, cool. But if the overall group fails, anyone who failed it during their check also takes an additional 1 damage. Is this punishing for failure too much? Maybe. And if you don't like the adding on that, if the group fails, anyone who failed their check leading to the group failing also takes damage. I do this because when I first implemented this, I had everyone takes 1 damage. But then that kind of felt bad for like, oh, these people did the best they possibly could, but they still took damage. So I think it's nice to just, even from a storytelling perspective, all right, these people failed and took this amount of damage. Let's tell the story of how that looked. And now for the D&D people out there, if you wanted to convert this over to D&D, you can have this be a certain amount of D6s, and you could scale those D6s up to D12s as they get higher in level. You can do multiple D6s. So if you fail, it's 2D6 and you keep adding 2D6 every time. So I would personally just convert this into damage, and how I've done this in D&D before, and I have play tested this with D&D before converting it over to DC20 and having it be a core principle in DC20 because I love it so much, is in D&D, if you failed, I would hand them out one of these. I'd hand them out a little D6, and at the end of the combat skill challenge, they would roll those D6 and take that many damage. And then if the group failed overall, I had D6s, I would roll them, and the people who failed would take additional damage. So in general, just convert it over to dice. 3 more next level tips here and some story examples and some DC setting examples. Man, we're just packing this one up. Duplicate checks. If I tell this to all of my groups, you're gonna have to say it 1 time to some groups and maybe issue this out 1 time for it to never happen again. But duplicate checks, like uncreative, absolutely mindless duplicate checks, are at disadvantage. So if some players just tries, I'm gonna scale the wall and try and climb up this thing to be able to jump down on it. If someone else says, Me too. That's a disadvantage. Repeat checks with no contribution towards any sort of anything right there is just, that's a disadvantage. Now, am I being too punishing for players that are like, oh, I don't think quickly on my feet, and I'm not as good at thinking of little puzzle solving role play type things or creative solution. I'm not talking about the creativity of it. I want that. It's more so the effort, and that is a standard that I set for my players to challenge them to be better and to learn how to play and open up the creativity in their heads. And I have played with players that have self-proclaimed themselves to be uncreative and they'd be the exact type of players that you'd be like, oh no, but what if my player doesn't like and they can't come up with. That's why there's other people around the table. That's what you're there for, to help as a team collectively describe this thing. So if a player says they're going to try and climb a wall to do this thing and another player says me too, I'd be like, well, that would be a check at disadvantage. You could totally do that, but let's try and think, what else are you trying to do? Or you want to climb the wall in a different way? Maybe if they're a tiny gnome creature, they could try and rig some rope to their friend's back and then they climb the wall that way. Ooh, that's cool. And maybe they would make a sleight of hand check or some sort of acrobatics check or some sort of dexterity check based on that. And that would be the check that they make. Or maybe they say, I want to climb the wall with them. Yeah, and sure, they climb the wall with them. But when I'm at the top of the wall, I want to make a perception check to kind of like look around and see what I see. Maybe that's advantageous for the different enemies that are coming in towards their position. Yeah, sure, awesome. And that's the cool things you can do within this combat skill challenge, is not have to be like, oh, do you climb the wall or not? And they have to make a check to see if they climb the wall. Everything revolves around the one check they make. And putting a little bit of pressure on players, I think, is a good thing to let them be able to diversify what kind of rolls they're making, or else then you'll get people to be like, I'm gonna run in and swing my sword. I'm gonna run in and swing my sword too. Me too. Everybody make attack rolls. Oh. No, give them a little bit of love and a little bit of pressure and then see what kind of cool things that they come up with, and it's so much more exciting. Another thing you can do, and this one's more so probably in DC 20, and you could convert this to D&D in the form of advantage instead, but another thing you can do in DC 20 is give your friend a help action. Instead of contributing a check towards the roll, instead of rolling a d20 and making a check, instead you can say, no, I'm going to help this person. And in the wall climbing analogy, if one person trying to climb the wall and the other person said me too, this also is another good out for the people that maybe are thinking they're not quite quick thinking on their toes and they say they want to help somebody. They do still need to describe how their character is helping this other character. But if you want to help another character, you can give them a help dice. And in DC 20, a help dice is a single D8. So instead of making your check, which could result in a success point, it could result in other things, could result in a failure, could result in a massive success with multiple points, you opt out of all of that, good and bad, to kind of take a neutral and a helpful, hey, here's a D8, and you choose one player or one character and you describe how you help them and they get a D8 to add to their roll. It is the safe route, and I've done the math and crunched the numbers on it. I think it is fine and fairly balanced and everything like that as well. A D8 adds 4.5 onto a roll, so you could turn a failure into a success. That's awesome. You could turn a success into a success by 5. Wow. You could turn a fail by 5 into just a failure and save them from some damage. So there is some good to it, but you are all self-sacrificing out on a full-blown roll you could be making to get multiple success points. And this note is also more so for DC 20 than D&D, but in D&D, I guess the version would be spell slots. Is in combat skill challenges, I do not charge mana for spells, and I would not charge spell slots to spellcasters. And this is the longer story, but from a game design perspective, if me saying that, oh, you don't have to spend mana, you don't have to spend spell slots, oh, that's not fair, it's like, yeah, stay with me. In a combat skill challenge, you are describing what your character is doing, and then you're making a check for it. For spellcasters, if they want to describe casting a spell like Banish, there's a bunch of demons that are onslaught, there's a hordes of demons attacking the city, and a warlock wants to describe that they just want to cast Banish, that's like that's the flavorful casting of what they're doing. Cool, sweet, give me a spell check. They describe something super cool, Banish, and then now they're making a spell check for it. Awesome. If I was to say that I charge them spell slots for it and they cost mana or they cost spell slots, now that player is not going to describe that. They're just going to describe that warlock's just going to say Eldritch Blast, and I'm just going to Eldritch Blast, and then say, okay, make a spell check. And now that's not as cool, or players would lean away from their spells and just describe cantrips, and they would only be able to describe cantrips, which is overall just lame. And if you want to say like, oh, maybe they get some extra stuff for if they cast mana or they spend mana, they can give themselves advantage. Well, now spellcasters can break combat skill challenges and spend mana to, that's not really where I want to go. Now again, DC 20 is still in its alpha, and I'm sure there's going to be some little tweaks and changes made across the board on some stuff, but there's just the behind the scenes thoughts. Now some example stories from Gen Con and how I set DCs and skill points and stuff like that. At Gen Con, one of the coolest playtests was Professor Dungeon Master from Dungeon Craft, Baron DeRop, Luke Hart from the DM Layer, and Gallant Goblin Grady Wang. I had a playtest with them and the challenge was there's a swarm of these like bug type crazy looking insects, and they had to try and kill them. Right now, at the end of this combat skill challenge, they were going to kill all the bugs. That was not what I was going to be putting in question. What was in question is how well it went. So they all described these epic things of what they wanted to do. Professor Dungeon Master was playing Deathbringer, and he said he turned his axe sideways so that the axe turned flat, and he was just freaking fly swatting all over the place. And they're all kind of using combos with each other and trying to back to back and fight off these bugs. And then Baron DeRop was playing an illusion wizard, and he described, I want to create an illusion of a rock and then hide inside the rock. So yeah, they all made their spell checks, and only one of them succeeded, and it was the wizard hiding in a rock. The other 3 players not hiding behind an illusory rock all took damage, all failed, and then overall they failed as a group, so they all took even more damage, and then we had to describe that story. But it was amazing, and it made so much sense because the wizard who hid an illusory rock took no damage. He was hiding in a rock, as the rest of the party, one wizard down, is just trying to hack through these bugs. And at the same time, in a one-shot quester group, who Duke and his team from One Shot Questers, also just a DC 20 side note, which is actually a huge note here, they're going to be playing DC 20 on their channel, all this kind of stuff. There's going to be a huge, me and Duke did the announcement of DC 20 together. He really loved DC 20, and a whole bunch of other content creators have loved DC 20 as well, so stay tuned for some content coming out from them. But in the One Shot Quester DC 20 one shot, they had this epic team battle where they all described different things they were doing, and I'm gonna go, there's this big rhino monster they were fighting, and I'm gonna grab the horn and tilt it down and like wrangle it to the ground. It's gonna slide. I'm gonna cast lightning on his legs to kind of shock and lock it up, and they described this like all the way across the board, this epic thing, and each person was doing. Now, not everyone succeeded, but let's say there were 6 of them. 4 of them succeeded, 2 of them failed, and then the 2 that failed were kind of the start to, they tried to do this thing and it didn't work, and as the rhino's coming to you, everyone who does succeed comes in and saves the day, and then fall on the last person who failed. And we ended that with the sorcerer, the lightning sorcerer that described this lightning shock. They got crushed by this unconscious body of this beast, and that was the story. And it's always so fun to drop that Dungeon Master screen down for a second and just talk with other players, like, let's talk about how this look, like how this go down, how this damage, like what does this look like? Because it's kind of like a how do you want to do this moment, but for the entire combat instead of one little moment. So how do you set these DCs and try to set how many skill points and what's a DC and how hard all this stuff is? The best way that I can describe this, and I use this advice for many different elements of dungeon mastering in general, is have a baseline, whether it be a monster's health or damage or homebrewing things. Have a baseline. So my baseline is the default DC based on the player character's numbers. Get an assumed value of what an average check would be. What's an average DC that they would kind of be able to succeed on? So for example, in DC 20, if I do a skill challenge for a level 1 group, I know that the skills that they're adding in, the ideal skills, not the little skills that they don't have any mastery in or proficiency or whatever system you're using, the things that they would probably be using, I know that they're probably going to use, and they're probably going to have a modifier of about 3 for their attribute. In DC 20, your prime attribute is your highest attribute. So their prime is going to be 3. Most likely, and then they're going to have combat mastery in the thing that they're doing, or skill mastery, so that's a 1 or a 2. So I know they're going to have a 2 or a 3 for one of their attributes and a 1 or a 2 for their mastery. So I know that number is probably going to be about a +4 for what they're adding to their roll. And I always start with a base of a DC of 10, because a DC 10 with a flat D20, you're going to succeed 55% of the time, which is just 1 notch higher of a 50-50. So now with that +4 in mind, we're going to hold on to that +4. Put it on the screen somewhere here, Zach. That +4 is a number I'm going to keep in mind. So I start off with a DC of 10, and now if you roll a D20 and you have no modifiers added to it at all, and you just roll a d20. A DC of 10 would be a 55% chance of you hitting a DC 10, and that's the starting point, not 50-50. I want to give it a little bit better of a shot for the players, the edge to them just a little bit, so kind of like a death save does. So DC 10 is that 55% chance, and that's kind of where I start at. And if I want to keep that chance, I would add that +4 onto that 10, which makes things really easy as well math-wise. So I know that the players are going to come in with about a +4, and the DC 10 is what I wanted to start off with. So a DC 14 would be a pretty solid DC for a level 1 group playing DC 20. DC 14 feels worthy, feels fine, and if you succeed by 5 and get a 19 on a check, whoa, you get a 19, that's 2 success points. And then the number of success points I normally have is the number of players at the table +1. Now, if you start getting 6 players or more, I usually add like a +2 for that, but I usually play with 4 or 5 players. And that's your baseline. You have your DC 10 plus whatever the assumed number that they're coming in with, that's the DC, and then players +1 is the number of skill points needed. And there's a lot more I could get into about all the theorizing of how this all works, but that would be in a separate video. And if this video gets a bunch of love and like, and you guys want to see more on this whole combat skill challenge and how to really set up some stuff in different ways to handle the DCs, handle the skill points, handle the successes and failures overall, how do you transition into and out of combat skill challenges, let me know. Comment down there, like a video, share it, all that kind of stuff. And just like usual, if you like any of this DC 20 stuff, you want to see more of it, you can check out the link down in the description. The alpha of DC 20 is out and available now, and there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff more added to it. There's a bunch of new classes coming out, new ancestry, subclasses, a whole bunch of stuff in these updates that are being released live. The alpha that is on the website right now is going to be updated every time I update the alpha. It's going to automatically be updated and new versions emailed to you as we develop it. And if you want even more cutting edge stuff and behind the scenes things and live streams where I'm making the game live with the patrons, you can check out the link over on Patreon and support the growth of this thing, because this whole game system would not be possible. Me making these YouTube videos would not be possible without my patrons. So again, thank you so much. I truly don't know if the patrons understand how massively important you guys are, so thank you for that. And all you YouTube viewers out there, I appreciate you guys too, liking these videos, watching them, seeing what's going on. Just even if you're sitting in the background interested about DC 20 and what's this whole thing's going on, and you're just watching, I appreciate you too, and everything. And this whole community has been amazing. Check out for live streams, check out for other stuff that I'm posting about, because a whole bunch of new stuff's coming for DC 20. And stay tuned, including other content creators. Stay tuned and stay creative. Think outside the box. Peace.